You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast hosted by Matt Franks and Zach Bechtold. We hope you enjoy this week's show, and you can find out more about us by going online at beardedtheologians.com, where you can pick up a few t-shirts, listen to a few old episodes, and find ways that you can connect with us. Thank you for listening. You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold. And today we have a first-time guest with us, never been on the show before. We have the Reverend Matt Rawle, who this is your sixth time on the podcast?
Record-breaking episode.
Yes, record-breaking episode. We're going to have a golden record put up on your wall.
My address is 347. Yeah.
Can we get your social along with that?
Sure. Mother's maiden name.
That's right. That's right. Well, Matt, for those of you who may be catching you for the first time or first time in a long time, remind our listeners a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, what's your perfect date.
For sure. Pina coladas and walking in the rain. Originally from New Orleans, best city in America, most unique city for sure. Ordained elder in the United Methodist Church. I've been serving Louisiana Conference since 2007. Went to Duke Divinity School. I went to LSU for undergrad, so I got football taken care of, and then went to Duke for grad school, so I got basketball taken care of. So if I have to go back, I need to find like a tennis school or a school good in fencing or something just to round out the experience.
I hear Tennessee has a good baseball school.
Well, I mean, we could do baseball. I might go back to LSU.
I was going to say, once upon a time, LSU had a good baseball team.
Man, come on. Serving currently at Asbury United Methodist Church in Bossier City, Louisiana, which is about 3 hours east of Dallas, in what we call the Arklatex. A very scientific name because it's where Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas converge.
Yeah.
Abingdon author, which is why I get to hang out with you again today, is this next book that's coming out called The Final Days. It's not about Revelation. I've gotten that question already before. Those are the last days, but this is the final days of Jesus's ministry, which is it's a fun book, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But so New Orleans native, father of 4, married to Christy. I have a senior in high school, so the oldest one is, so we're training her on things like how to do laundry, make sure you don't run out of gas, these basic how to boil water, this is what we're doing. And so far she's got an A+ on it,
Nice.
So we'll see where that goes.
Good. It's good to know. I'm about to send my daughter to you. She graduates in May also, and so you'll have a 5th daughter to teach up things real quick.
It's great. I mean, what's more clowns for the circus? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like it's we have another seat in the minivan. So what's another?
It's perfect. Plug your podcast for a minute before we get going here.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that. Y'all have been guests on that before. It's called In the Sandbox. Actually, we're recording season 2 right now. And so season 1 was all about curiosity. And season 2 is going to be about leadership. And it's part of the Hub for Innovation, hubforinnovation.org. That's the number 4, hubforinnovation.org. Some exciting news about that. So we have a podcast called In the Sandbox, recording season 2 now. We just heard yesterday that we're starting a new round of cohorts in New Orleans.
Nice.
So that's hot off the press. That's going to be tons of fun. And we have a conversation with Duke Divinity School coming up later today of how the Hub can be connected with seminaries. And we also have, starting in the fall, GBHEM is partnering with a Methodist Theological School of Ohio and the Hub for Innovation for digital field education placements. So we are experimenting with a digital forward experience for our seminary students starting at MTSO. So we're never bored, man.
Yeah.
Lots of things going on with the Hub for Innovation for sure. So thanks for asking for the plug. Brand new podcast. It's not full of seasoned veterans as the esteemed gentleman I'm speaking with now, but baby steps. We're learning.
Well,
We're
my
getting there.
my question for you to plug it was mainly to see if you were still going after we were on and
Yeah.
make sure we didn't kill it for
Yeah,
you.
our concluding episode was with the bearded theologians.
I'm glad you got a season 2 after that.
That's right. That we renewed. We were renewed. All of our sponsors decided to renew us. That's right.
Good. I love it. Well, Matt, let's dive into the book. Tell us a little bit about the final days and just what you've been working on and bringing us through Lent into Easter.
Yeah, so the final days, super proud of this book. Not all of my books am I proud of. Some of them are real stinkers. We could talk about that later, but this one, really excited about. It's actually it's a long time in process. So it really started my junior year of high school, and that was when I started reading the Bible, really for the first time on my own. Right. So in my sophomore year of high school, my friends and I would meet at the flagpole and we would pray every Wednesday. We always felt very important because we bended the ear of the Almighty with our concerns for the world. But it also felt good, right? I had a community, we were covenanting together, and it felt great. Well, in my junior year, I started going to Key Club, which is a service organization, part of Kiwanis, right? So I couldn't make our prayer gatherings at the flagpole, and I found out that they were praying for me, but not in like the, oh, we hope he's doing really well kind of way, but like, oh my gosh, he's backsliding because he's not with us for prayer kind of a way, right? So I decided to be very vengeful and angry, and I got back at them by reading the Bible for myself. So that's, it's very Joker against Batman kind of maniacal plan. I said, I'll show them. I'm gonna read the Bible, So, but I did, and it was Holy Week of my junior year. And I was reading through Mark's gospel because it's the shortest.
Correct.
My mama didn't raise no dummy. I started with the shortest one. And I got to this moment where Jesus is standing before Caiaphas. And Caiaphas says, I put you under oath. Are you the Messiah, the Son of God? And Jesus says, yes, I am. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Father and coming in the clouds. And I thought, yes, I am. Well, that's pretty definitive. I should highlight that in my NRSV, or it might have been NIV at that time. Anyways, and I knew enough to know that Matthew, Mark, and Luke are relatively similar. So I looked up the same passage in Matthew. And there's Caiaphas, I put you under oath, are you the Messiah, the Son of God? In Matthew, Jesus' answer is, you say that I am, but I say to you, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Father and coming in the clouds. And that, my friends, is not the same answer.
Right.
And it's not that like the witnesses like heard it wrong, like a Monty Python kind of thing, like blessed are the cheesemakers, no, that's a different answer, for a different audience. Well, I looked it up in Luke, and in Luke, it's not Caiaphas who asks, it's they asked, the community of the Sanhedrin, and Jesus' answer forgets the whole coming in the clouds part, because that's a reference from Daniel, and Luke isn't interested in Daniel's prophecy. And then finally I said, do I dare look this up in John? Because John is like the hippie version of the gospel. Like he's like from Denver, just like living the dream in Colorado and just like writing all this stuff down. Like, man, isn't this cool? Like water in the wine, like, so I read it in John, and in John, Jesus and Caiaphas never talk. There's no recorded conversation between the two of them. So I'm having this moment as a high schooler saying, why did no one tell me this? I mean, are they not aware of this? Are people afraid to suggest that the Gospels don't agree? Like, what does this mean? And that actually was a big part of my calling and trajectory into ministry. What else am I missing? And what else is not being communicated to church? Just because there's some tension in Scripture doesn't mean we avoid it. Right? Let's dive. So it wasn't the case that like I threw the Bible out because there was tension. I actually dove deeper into it. Like, why? Because that's a pretty simple question, and you would imagine that Jesus' answer would be relatively the same to that question, and it's not. So what's up with that? So this book, actually, that's when it really starts. And finally, it's a process, friends. So writing books is a process. So I started writing on like Doctor Who, and Scrooge and like Wally, Disney's Wally, right? And then finally, like 11 books in, they let me write on Jesus finally. So I'm not, now and this is book number 13. So finally with book number 13, I get to write on Jesus and Holy
And you
Week.
get to write 6 chapters instead of 4.
Exactly. It's a process. Like they trust you with 4, and then they're like,
That's right.
maybe you
You
can
can
add a
get
couple
6.
chapters depending on sales. But no, I'm writing on Jesus during Holy Week, and this is amazing. So the book really is a dive into, that's the catalyst of the book of, okay, this seems so simple and definitive, and yet Jesus gives different answers. What else have we been missing about this story? So after that kind of introduction in the first chapter, the second chapter is, you know what? Scripture they don't really talk about a Messiah until they discern that they need one. In terms of God's people, right? The ancient Israelites and the Hebrew people. I mean, there's not talk of a Messiah in Leviticus, or Judges, really. It's when there is captivity, there is hope for freedom, right? So the whole second chapter is, what kind of Messiah are you looking for? At the beginning of John's Gospel, the disciples come to Jesus and he asks them, "What are you looking for?" And then he says, "Come and see." What an invitation! What an invitation into the story of Jesus. Jesus asks you, "What are you looking for?" And then it's almost like, regardless of your answer, Jesus says, "Okay, we'll come and see." Right? So that whole second chapter of the book is discerning. So, what Messiah are you looking for? As United Methodists and as clergy, we preach Jesus in all 4 offices of priest, prophet, king, and servant. Sometimes you need a priest, man. Sometimes you need healing, right? Sometimes you need a prophet to wake yourself up, right? To tell you the truth right between your eyeballs. Sometimes you need a king where you just say, "Tell me what to do.
Right.
I don't know where I'm going. Just point me in the good direction," right? I'm not in the mood for democracy right now. I need an autocrat, a loving one, but a loving autocrat to tell me what to do, and then serve it. Sometimes you need Jesus to walk with you, and all of that is okay. So to dive into,
Alexa wants to know what you're doing.
that's okay. Hey man, we could talk about AI as long as you want, and how it's always listening.
Always.
For sure. And now that I know you have an Alexa, I'm going to keep dropping the name to see if I can get it going during this podcast. That's going to be a fun game. Alexa, reveal Matt's search history for the soccer practice. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Soccer fields. Yeah. Soccer schedules. So before we jump into Jesus as Messiah, I ask the audience, what kind of Messiah are you looking for? Right? Where are you in your journey? Right? Well, then come and see. So we start with this old story of reading the Bible for myself, and then kind of my own journey of, so what Messiah am I looking for? Am I looking for love in all the wrong places? Right? And like, what kind of priest, prophet, king, servant? Where am I on this journey of Jesus, especially during Holy Week? And then there's more.
You
If
left
want me
Matt
to keep going.
speechless. Wow.
Well, I'm thankful that you're discerning between priest, prophet, and king. I hope it didn't throw you. I hope you're not like what he's doing. Zach is clearing his browsing history. That's what, because you got nervous. He stopped listening. No, so we jump into the Gospels proper, right? And it's fascinating to me. I learned a lot while writing this book of just how unique these different gospel stories are, and the way that they present Jesus, and in the way that they remember the community and how they're reaching the community. And I think one of the most important parts of this is, and I didn't know this. This is one of those like duh moments. Like I should have known this.
I mean, you went
but
to
I
Duke,
didn't.
so you know all things.
I should know all things. Like when you go to Duke, they give you 2 things upon graduation. They give you a degree and a sense of pretension. Like those are the overinflated sense of self-worth is free. That's you get that without, just in proximity of being on campus. And I didn't know this. So our liturgy for the Great Thanksgiving is an amalgamation of all three Gospels and what Jesus does at the Last Supper. For example, in Matthew, and I think this is really important, in Matthew, the language of this cup is poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins is unique to Matthew's Gospel. That is not in Luke. In Luke, it is this is the cup of the new covenant, so language of new is in Luke. This is the cup of the new covenant. Do this in remembrance of me. As often as you drink it, do it in remembrance of me. That remembrance is unique to Luke's gospel. And it's so interesting that on Sunday mornings when we're at the table, we combine those two. This is the cup over which we give thanks is a means of sharing in the forgiveness of sins. Do this as often as you drink of it in remembrance of me, right? We combine those two, and that's fine in terms of liturgy. But when we read this story uniquely in their contexts, something really beautiful and important emerges. Matthew's concern is our righteousness before God. There's much more of an atonement flavor in Matthew's gospel than in the other gospels, especially around the table. This is the cup that is poured out for you for the forgiveness of sins. He tells us this is what it's for, right? In Luke, that's not the case. Luke's primary concern is he's dealing with Gentiles and Jews together. So reconciled community is much more important to Luke than our singular righteousness before God. Matthew says, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. That's not in Luke. Luke is all about the horizontal of community. So Matthew is much more about the vertical. Luke is much more about the horizontal. And newsflash, friends, we need both of those gospels because that's how we find the cross, right? That's the youth group version of this lesson. Is you have the vertical beam of Matthew and the horizontal beam of Luke, and when you put them together, there is the cross, right? Same thing with the crucifixion. There's really unique and nuanced language that happens, and that it points to what the concern of the author was, what the concern of the community was, and their flavor and their understanding of what God is doing in the person of Jesus. So as we read these stories independently in their own context, as the early church did, because churches early on didn't have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Some churches had Matthew, some churches had Luke, right? This kind of the Johannine community is where we get John. What's equally fascinating when we dive into this is because all of Paul's letters predate the Gospels. Right, all of Paul's letters were written before the Gospels, not before the tradition of the Gospels, but before the Gospels were penned. It's fascinating to me that Paul and Luke are associated with each other in theology and not Matthew. So when Paul, for example, in 1 Corinthians, lifts up, I pass on to you what I inherited, and this is what happens at the Lord's Supper, he is not recalling, but Luke recalls what Paul remembers about do this in remembrance of me. Paul does not say that the Last Supper is about atonement and forgiveness. So Paul might not have known, or Matthew might not have known Paul's work. Matthew, right, Jewish-centered theology and practice, and I might not be right about this, but Matthew, I think, was writing out of Antioch, which was a Jewish center, and Paul, I don't know if Paul ever made it to Antioch with his flavor of the gospel. So it's fascinating when we start to break these things apart and look at the pieces, not the whole. When you look at the molecules and not the whole thing together, elements, not molecules, you begin to see their influence and you're able to trace their history in the rest of the New Testament. So all of this to say, friends, like I learned a lot. I don't know if I don't know if y'all are going to learn a lot. I learned a lot while putting this together, and the Holy Week story really began to become much more rich and much more nuanced for me. Like, for example, and I again, something that I just never had quite paid attention to is the calls for crucifixion didn't start on Friday or when Jesus was presented before the crowd. So here's Sunday, he's riding a donkey into town. And in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he's riding a donkey, and then they say Hosanna. In John, it's backwards. Not sure why. But in John, he goes into the city and they're like, Hosanna. So, and then as a response to that, Jesus gets on the donkey and starts riding it. Fascinating stuff. When we look at the minutia of these stories, really nuanced picture comes out. But there's this formula, right? So you ride the donkey, you speak truth to power, you go to the temple, and then you purchase a sacrifice, a very expensive sacrifice for the people to gain their favor. Those are the markers that you are the Messiah. So Jesus, step one, riding the donkey. Got it. Step two, speaking truth to power to the Pharisees, right? Step three, go to the temple, but instead of purchasing the expensive sacrifice, what does Jesus do? Overturns the money changing tables. At that point, the people are like, oh, wait, he didn't follow the formula. He didn't follow the rules. Maybe this isn't who we think he is. And Luke does a masterful job of this. So one of the questions that I had going into this is Matthew and Luke present the temptation account in a different order. I've never heard a great explanation for that until now in the book, The Final Days by Reverend Matt Rawle. So Matthew has Jesus, so the bread, stones in the bread, right? They agree on that. But then the other two are in a different order. In Matthew, it is then the temple, jump from the temple, and then the devil shows Jesus the kingdoms of the world. In Luke, that's reversed. So it's stones in the bread, and then it's overlooking the kingdoms of the world, and then it ends at the temple. And I've heard a lot of people say, well, Luke had a really a very charitable view of the temple and this kind of thing. I don't think that's the case. I think what Luke is doing, and this is fascinating to me, Luke, the order of the temptation fits the map of Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem. So now there's a much bigger association between temptation and what I consider to be Jesus' final temptation to resist power going into Jerusalem. So you start with the stones, right? Turn these stones into bread. Jesus goes into the city, and one of the first things he does is the Pharisees tell him to shut up. And he goes, if I'm quiet, then the stones themselves will sing out, right? So I can't turn the stones into bread because they are needed to sing out if I am silenced. Beautiful correlation there. And then second, Jesus in Luke looks over Jerusalem and weeps. How I long to gather you as a hen gathers its chicks. And therefore, the second temptation in Luke is looking over the kingdoms of the world. And then third and finally, Jesus then goes to the temple and overturns the money-changing tables, which is why I think Luke changes the order where the last temptation is at the temple for him. And only in Luke does it say the devil left him for an opportune moment. And that opportune moment, I think, was the beginning of Holy Week, was the beginning of that triumphant entry. So when we take these stories in their own context, and because we often bring our own assumptions into these stories, right? It's like with Christmas, right? We're on the heels of Christmas here. Having the wise men at the nativity, it's not wrong. It's just a combination of Matthew and Luke, right? Same thing when we celebrate the Eucharist, is saying that this cup is for the forgiveness of sins. Do this in remembrance of me. Nothing wrong with that. It's just a combination of Matthew and Luke. When we forget that these stories are unique in the way that they are revealing Christ, we miss some really, really beautiful, nuanced stories. Like, for example, how Luke, the temptation account is in a different order in order to reveal that the temptation account is very long. It almost encompasses the entire story of Jesus' temptation against power and authority, right? So we miss that when we combine them all into one unique, univocal story, right? And that's really the heart of the book. And then there's John. You'll throughout the whole book, I always have this little refrain. And then there's John. John's bozo. I mean, I love John. I wrote a book on it. Jesus Revealed is about the Gospel of John. I think it sold about 23 copies, and most of them from Denver.
Sorry.
So yes, yeah. So Jesus Revealed is super, super popular. book. But yeah, one of my refrains is, and then there's John. Like John's story is totally bozo and different and lovely and layered and nuanced. But John really is in its own category. So that's a quick overview of the final days
Mhm.
of diving into the beauty of those unique stories.
In the book, you talk about passion, and you had I don't know, like you had this line, and it's I've been wrestling with it all morning,
Sure.
where you say your passion isn't something that you really like or a hobby in which you obsess. A passion is something in which you are willing to suffer. And I the way that you talked about passion really got me thinking about um how we live that out in our daily lives. Like, what is your like when you start to really think about what are you willing to really suffer for? Um, it definitely gets you thinking, and those the correlation between Holy Week and suffering tend to happen. And so like I just found it interesting in which like you drew that out. Like to me, it came out of nowhere. Like I was reading this, and all of a sudden, like that hit me, and I was like, oh, this is going to be interesting. Like and you know, so yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, passion is not something that you really like. Like I'm passionate about pizza. I mean, I am. I will suffer indigestion for a really good pizza. So it's not something that I really like. It is something through that I will suffer for, and that passion and joy are related in that sense, right? Joy, and I'm going to put it on my headstone because I really want people to remember. Joy is the steadfast assurance that God is with us.
Hmm.
It's neither happy nor is it sad. It is other, right? It is knowing that the presence of God is with you. And without joy, we can't have passion because what gets us through our passion, the things that we're suffering for the good, is knowing that God is there and God is with us, right? And when I became a parent of kids, that made sense, right? I specifically remember one night my oldest had the croup and could not catch her breath and could not. And I sat in the bathroom with the steam on, holding her for hours. You know. Now, if I didn't have a kid, I mean, now that'd be weird for me to just stand alone in a shower. All metaphors break down at a certain point.
That's
But
right.
you don't think about it. You're not saying like, oh my gosh, tomorrow's gonna be such a long day. I'm gonna be tired, or I need to get. No, it's like I really wish she could catch her breath, and I'll stand in this shower for as long as I need to. Right? What are you willing to suffer for? And when we think about suffering, because suffering, we need to check our privilege when we also talk about suffering, right? As an upper middle class white guy in the South, when I talk about suffering, I have to be very careful,
Mhm.
right? Because they're not coming for me as a
Right.
white guy in the South, right?
Right.
And a 6'3", 260 white guy in the South too. Like no one's coming for me. It's so funny when I talk to some of my colleagues of how like I've learned a lot, and this is why we need community for prayer, for reading scripture well, for being in ministry. One of my colleagues, who's a female pastor, was going to the beach, and she was asking for recommendations of where to go. And I was like, oh, there's this really cool secluded beach down at the end. It's a nature preserve, like there's no one there. And she's like, I'm not going there because they can hide the body. Like, what are you talking about?
Right.
Right? Oh, good. Single female going to a secluded, deserted. Yeah, good idea, Jack.
Mhm.
And that, I mean, but I've never thought about that. I've never
Right.
been worried about as a 6'3" white guy going to a secluded beach. To me, it's like peaceful and lovely. No
Mhm.
one's around there. And for her, it's like, sure, because
Yeah.
they won't be able to hear you scream. Like, what's wrong
Right.
with you? So when we talk about suffering, we need to check our privilege.
Mhm.
But and I'm not saying that because someone is suffering worse than you that your own suffering doesn't matter. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
But what I am saying is we must be very careful contextually when talking about our great sufferings in serving the church,
Mhm.
right? But with that said, our passion is something that we will joyfully suffer for. And I think the joyfully part is important. So yeah. Thanks for lifting that up. Early in the book, I do talk about passion. Before we get into Jesus's passion, like the passion of the Christ, right?
Yeah.
Let's define that, right? And yes, it is a story about God loving us very, very much, but it is a suffering love, right? What are we joyfully willing to suffer for the good of the kingdom, for the good of our families, for the good of ourself, you know? But that also doesn't mean it doesn't need to be checked at the
Well,
end
and
of the day, right?
that's how I like how you went from the passion into suffering. Even in the conversation, like that was my next question about, unpack your concept of suffering that you talk a little bit about, but you did that.
Well, now that I've been on the show for 6 times, I'm beginning to
You understand
Here's the
it.
flow.
You
the
understand
follow-up.
that I only read I look for
I,
the bold-faced
I'm beginning to.
things. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
But the idea of suffering, and it was just like even this morning I was having the conversation of how do we um, how do we address suffering in an affluent community? Like we know that there are people that are suffering, and it may how do we sit there and be the presence and but been thinking about like what does that mean? Like how can we um not dilute someone's suffering because they're in a particular place or have some luxuries that most don't, but yet how can we still be Jesus to them in those moments? It's I just I you had some really good lines on how sometimes suffering is, and I think that that's
Mm,
definitely something to consider. And it's not just about checking your privilege, but it's about understanding things that we do not experience, and that can be in a lot of spaces. Like I know it's always interesting when I talk about being Native American and how people
mm,
respond to me differently, and I can see it. They don't have to say anything. They just they either they
mm,
or they get engaged or they ask me some other questions. But like I think in a sense of getting to know the other and being present with them, and to me that's where like Jesus comes into this. Like that's what Jesus taught us to do, is to be present in places where
Mhm.
the religious community wasn't. And like I said, I loved how you drew that, and then like I did love how you kind of just like jabbed at John occasionally, just to lay
and
that
there's
out there.
John.
Yeah, and then there's John.
Yeah, and that really began to change my writing and my preaching,
Mm,
because I was writing from my perspective of privilege, because I was saying things like, we need to be with the poor.
mhm.
Well, the assumption is the poor isn't reading the book, right? 'Cause it really, and this is actually helpful, I think, uh, not only, so it's twofold. One, it's asking, right? How, like sending my writing to friends and saying, how are you reading this, right? Sabrina Short is one of my conversation partners, where I say, like, she's an African American innovator out of New Orleans.
Mhm.
How are you reading this, right? Help me check my privilege in my writing, not so that I'm inauthentic,
Mhm.
right? But just make sure what assumptions am I adding to this writing, you know? That's really helpful, and because I'm working on a new book now, that will be turned in about a month and a half, something like that, and it's called "Faith Over Fear: Abraham's Imperfect Journey." And I really was very cognizant, because there are layers and I'll do another whole, I'm sure,
Yeah, yeah,
episode
yeah.
7 with Matt Rawle will be on this one, but a real concerted effort, because Abraham's story is quite problematic,
Mhm.
especially for minorities. Hagar's story, right? Hagar, as a slave, an enslaved person, is kicked out and given like a dram of water. Like that's
Mhm.
it, right? There's also, I mean, Abraham is one of the first sex traffickers of the Bible. He treats his wife as his sister,
Mhm.
and to save his own skin, like gives her to Pharaoh, right? There's some layers here of the
Right.
story that
Right.
we need to wrestle with, right? So, and that's really changed my writing in terms of checking privilege, of not to be inauthentic, because I am a white guy from the South, and no one is asking me to be anything other than that, which I learned in Charlotte. I had a discussion with someone. I was presenting Faith of a Mockingbird in Charlotte, and a black woman found me afterwards, and she said, "You still made Atticus the hero. Why'd you do that?" I was like, "Because Atticus is the hero." And she's like, she goes, "Look, you never mentioned Tom Robinson's wife in your book." And I'm like, "Oh, dang, I didn't," you know. And she goes, "Look, I'm not asking you to write as a black woman, but I am asking you to make room for my story."
Yeah.
Right. And that was super important for me to hear. So ever since then, trying to recognize, and I think this will help the clergy who are listening into this when they're preaching, what assumptions have you brought into the room that you might not be aware of? Not only in interpretation, but in the way that you write your sermons, you know? And yes, you have to write to the folks who are in the house, right? I don't think we should write sermons for some ambiguous general audience out there, right? But we do have to check our own assumptions when we're writing these things and teaching these things.
Right. Well, it goes back to your original foundation and wrestling with the inconsistencies, right? Or how scripture doesn't always match up, right? And figuring out why. Well, they're written to different audiences, right? They're written for different purposes. They're written for in a different tone for people to hear. And we have to do that, right? We have to do that as preachers and teachers of here's who I know is in the audience. Here's what I struggle with and the passions that I have. And how do we bring that to the forefront, knowing people are coming from a different place regardless, right? Like Bozeman's a pretty flat demographic. I mean, it's more diverse than the rest of Montana, but still pretty flat.
It's Montana.
It's Montana, right? And
Sure.
but brings its own perspective. They haven't had to be present in some sufferings that your community has been, right?
You know, that reminds me. Yeah. Jasper Peters. I don't know if you know Jasper. He's, I think, in your annual
him fairly
conference.
well.
Yeah. So Jasper and I, through a really wicked twist of fate or providence or however you want to define that, found ourselves in England. We were both presenting at a Doctor Who forum at the University of Manchester. My life is bozo. That's a bozo thing. You know,
Be careful with that. That's a derogatory term up in these parts of the world.
bozo?
Well,
Okay.
It's not a nice slang term for Bozeman.
Oh, got you. Like I'm going through the Rolodex in my head, and I'm thinking, like, who's offended at bozo? Oh, Bozeman.
people.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. Thank you for offending my people. Yeah.
That's right.
So, okay, it is a strange twist of fate.
There you go.
A curious predestination of the Lord. We were presenting at the University of Manchester. It was Religion and Doctor Who Day, and it was celebrating the 50th anniversary of Doctor Who. And the religion department at the University of Manchester invited people from all over the world to come and talk about the religious symbolism in the show. And you know, I love when because I submitted an academic paper to them, and Andrew Crome, Dr. Crome, emailed me back and said, "Hey, we want to invite you to speak." He goes, "We can't pay you." I was like, "I don't care. Like, I'm going there. I'll figure it out." Yeah, I'm gonna figure that out. So Jasper also was one of the speakers for that event, and we found ourselves in a pub after. So we went to dinner at a Cajun Asian fusion place, which was very curious in Manchester, England.
Right.
To run into that, right? So like, okay. Anyway, so afterwards we went to a pub, and I just asked him. I said, "Hey, man, what's your experience like? What's different? What's unique in your experience here?" I'll never forget. He goes, "Here, I am not met with eyes of suspicion as a black man." I was like, "That's fascinating." He goes, "I can't really describe it, but the way people look at me here is not the way people look at me in the States."
Right.
You know, and that was, again, just an important moment for me of like, oh my gosh, you know, it's like recommending a secluded beach for a female colleague, you know, and talking about bozos in Montana. You know, my gosh, how unique and different our experiences are with life. And yeah, that's kind of the heart of the book that I'm thinking about right now. That was a great point, Zach. I should have included all that in the book. That's good. Those are great.
In part two, I got you.
Yeah. Second revision.
What's really funny is that, like, so my wife works for Jasper.
Cool.
Yeah, she is his administrative assistant. So
fantastic.
So like, yeah, small world.
Yeah, it's been a long time. I've not spoken with him in a good long while. I'm jealous of his hair, man. Like, ooh, he's man, it's fantastic. I miss Jasper.
Just
Anyway,
another reason to come out here and
That's
hang
right.
out with us.
that's right. The list is growing.
Yeah.
All right. Just thinking about the question of who are you looking for? What Jesus are you looking for? What droids are you looking for? Right? You
He
know,
made a Star Wars reference. Oh my gosh! Like
That's great.
you're
Yeah.
welcome. That's
the
one,
world is going to
the
end.
one you get this year.
The world is going to end.
Um,
I'm nervous.
you should be. I love that journey that you're taking through the Gospels and looking at the different pictures we get of Jesus. That's why I have so many behind me, because it sparks that question. Well, it does two things. When people are mad at me, they can't yell at me because I have to do that and yell at Jesus. Uh,
That's right.
but it sparks the question of who are you looking for? Who do you
Yeah.
need in these moments? And depending on what we're going through, depending on the highs and low moments, the green pastures and the dark valleys that we're walking through, that's who's showing up. That's who we need to show up in those moments. It's a reminder for me as a pastor of what people need from me, but it's a reminder of me as a pastor, who am I preaching today? Which Jesus am I coming to, and why? What's going on in my life and my world that this is the Jesus I'm pulling out today, or what's going on in the congregation in the world that this is the Jesus I need to preach today. And what cracks me up every time through uh the other gospels in John, Jesus is like, go tell everyone what I'm doing. And the
Yeah.
others are like, Jesus like, don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
Don't,
Shh.
please, please don't tell
Yeah.
anybody. And it cracks me up every time because I'm like, what do you want me to do, Jesus? Like, you want me to tell anybody? You want me to tell everybody? I can't win here.
No, and that's lovely, right? That
Right.
when the Gospels, because we do a lot of work in terms of recognizing
Mhm.
that some of us are heart people, some of us are mind people, some of us are soul people, some of us are strength people. Love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. I tend to read that plural
Mhm.
as with your people, and your people fall into different categories. Heart people are emotionally driven, and they feel like they have been at worship when the music is big, and the service is beautiful. And mind people, the best you're going to get from them is a nod from the congregation. They're going to cross their hands and kind of go, you know. And the compliment from a mind person is, I never thought about the prodigal son that way, before. That's great. Soul people, all they really need is a sunny day and a stained glass window, cuckoo, cuckoo, right? They're good with silence and as my Catholic sister says, smells and bells. So all the accoutrement of that. And then strength people, if they're not on a mission trip, and they're the ones passing out the bulletins and at the soundboard. They worship with their hands. They're doing that. And there's this. If we present a one size fits all experience,
Mhm.
we miss the nuance of our human experience,
Mhm.
right? So yeah, there's this Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and then there's John. Like in John, it's a foot washing and not an institution of the Last Supper, right? The resurrection accounts. Oh my gosh. Let's talk about nuance and uniqueness. And Mark, they run from the tomb and say nothing to no one, right?
Right.
In Matthew, the risen Lord says, go and tell the nations,
Mhm.
right? I will be with you always. And then, in Luke, we have this Emmaus story, right? Where Jesus is finally recognized in the breaking of the bread. And then, of course, John, Jesus is mistaken for a gardener.
Right.
Like, that's kind of hilarious.
Mhm.
That Mary is at the tomb and she's like, hey, tell me where you left him. I mean, she thinks he's the gardener, a
Yeah.
hired hand. But also, how perfect is that?
Yeah.
That he looks like a servant.
Mhm.
He looks like a gardener. Never mind the fact that it was God's first job, planting a garden.
Right.
So she's really seeing Jesus as Jesus is, as the Christ. But we run into these problems when we sometimes inappropriately put all these stories together because it can lead to a lot of anxiety and tension.
Mhm.
Okay, Jesus, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to go tell it on the mountain, or am I supposed to be quiet?
Right.
Well, today, what is the Holy Spirit leading you to do?
Mhm.
Right? Because some days we do need to be quiet. We need to shut our dang mouth.
Right.
And right. And some days we do need to be prophetic and tell the world, right? And
Mhm.
it's not one size fits all. And I always talk about the Bible as more like a script than an instruction manual.
Mhm.
It's like an improvisation script,
Mhm.
right? It gives you the setting, it gives you some of the details, then it says go, right?
Mhm.
Like you're at Second City or something like that. It's not, the Bible doesn't tell you what to do on a Tuesday afternoon at 2:30.
Mhm.
It's just not written that way, right?
Okay.
It's not an instruction manual. It is an improv guide. And then when we can lean into that, we finally begin to understand when Jesus says, "Don't worry, don't worry," right? Follow the Spirit. You're going to be okay. So
Yeah. I love that. Before we transition into the next thing, or Matt, did you have something?
Oh no, that's actually what I was
Okay.
going to do.
Yeah. Did you have any final comments, or we'll transition into a new game that we're going to play with Matt?
Oh, I am very much looking forward to this game that I've been hearing about. This rumor of this new game.
Well,
Well,
go ahead. Go ahead.
first off, before we kick into the game, where can they find this
Yes.
book?
Yeah, anywhere fine books are sold. Now, if you go to mattrawl.com, mattrawl.com, that's kind of a one-stop shop for everything, including links to the books, links to our Hub for Innovation Substack, if you want to get connected with some of the work that we're doing there. Mattrawl.com is great. Of course, you can find it at Cokesbury, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, that kind of thing. I will say, I will add it to my, just like I went to University of Manchester, so I'm never taking international speaker off of my resume ever. Yes. The Final Days hit #1 on Amazon in the category of Easter for about 17 and a half minutes.
Perfect.
And I'm never taking that off of my resume that I have a #1 new release.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. The context
It wasn't
isn't
there for
important.
long. No, context doesn't matter.
It would have held longer if you would have put us on the back of the book, like I've been telling
That's
you
right.
all these
If
years.
if your pictures were on the back of that book with an endorsement, it would still be #1.
Yes.
People
Amazon
will look
wouldn't have
back in
accepted it, but
history.
they're like,
What was
I would
what was
buy
the
a box.
penultimate moment in 2025? What changed the world? Well, Matt and Zach on the back of Matt Rawle's book,
Yeah.
That's right.
obviously.
Yeah. Jeffrey
So, yeah.
Mahan, Dr. Jeffrey Mahan wrote a sentence about us in a book, and I've got 3 of them on my shelf.
Yes, and I talk about that I'm in a book. Actually, I'm actually even mislabeled in the book as a ILIF alum. So I have it literally printed off an ILIF Theological
That's
Seminary
fantastic.
thing
Honorary
on my
degree.
wall because I have one, according to Jeffrey Mahan. So we're gonna play this game. We've been kicking around this idea of this game for years, and we finally put it to ChatGPT to help us write this. So we're gonna play a game, and I'm going. Zach, do you have yours up too? Do you
Yeah, I
have
got it up.
Okay.
Mhm.
So we'll give you four options, or we'll give you four quotes. Okay, and you have to choose: is this quote from the Song of Solomon, or
Gosh.
a raunchy a love novel kind of deal? So, Zach, I will let you ask the first one to go to kick us off.
This is great.
All right. Let's see here. Arise, my darling, my beautiful one, and come with me. Is this
Song of
Song of Solomon? It is.
Yes.
Good job. Good job.
Thank you.
All right. So, I never knew how to worship until I knew how to love.
Raunchy book.
I'll give you bonus points if you can name the book.
Oh,
It will kill you.
Fourth Wing. I don't know.
I don't know how well read you are. I mean, I know Zach only reads like backs of books, but
Look,
that actually
Internet
came,
pictures. I'm out.
it came from The Great Gatsby.
Oh, okay.
But good choice.
Yes.
Ready?
Sure.
He touched her as if she were made of glass, his hands reverent, his gaze full of wonder.
Not Song of Solomon.
That is not Song of Solomon. That is a cord of thorns and roses.
I was just about to say that. I was just about to say a cord. I've not read any of them, but I know the covers. Like one is like pinkish, one is blue, one is green. Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
I don't know whether or not to be really good at this game or pretend to be really bad at it.
To be really bad at it.
It's almost as bad as looking into your search history. I mean,
That's right. That's right. Next one. Let's go.
Your lips are like a scarlet ribbon, and your mouth is lovely.
Song of Solomon.
Yeah.
I have a story at the end of this. Anyway, go ahead.
We'll
Oh
let Zach pick one more for the bonus
Ooh,
round.
one more. All right. It's love is not a weakness. It's the strength that binds us together when all else falls apart.
I was going to say Corinthians. Not Song of Solomon.
That is not Song of Solomon.
Boom.
Good job.
he was perfect. So
You
we'll
were
send him.
100%.
We will send him some obscure random bearded theologians gear.
No, well, I don't want to.
Well, he's just getting a copy of the Court of Thorns and Roses.
That's what I'm going to say. Send me fairy smut. So that's what you should do.
I really thought about maybe it's just a shirt that says "I know the book of Song of Solomon." Just
I've
like
read
really
the song,
big.
yes.
I've read the songs.
Yeah. I officiated my sister's wedding, and the one rule she gave me, because her reading was from the Song of Solomon, and she goes, "Don't continue the verse because the end of the verse says your breasts are like a cluster of nuts." And she says, please don't keep reading. I was given the infamous challenge of not reading too much scripture.
Right.
At a wedding.
Right. I mean, did you tell her my pastoral task is to read the fullness and the context in which it's been given?
I did not. Because I fear my sister. That's correct. She's no. My sister is the prosecuting attorney when lawyers are being disbarred in the state of Louisiana.
Terrifying.
Oh wow,
it's absolutely terrifying.
I would like to never meet her.
I'm glad she's on my side. Yes.
Right.
Oh my gosh,
love it.
Yeah.
Well,
so
we thank you for being on the show, and we'll have links to all the things that way people can buy your books, and you get that nice bearded theologians bump of 2 to 3 people.
There it is.
You already got it. I already bought mine.
Number one.
Which is a rarity. He very rarely ever pre-buys the book before the person comes on. So he's making progress. Although he did text me last night saying that he was disappointed. There were no pictures.
There are no pictures.
And so we need to
It's true.
We need to have some hand-drawn Matt Rawle pictures of your next scriptural book. Just saying.
Can you spit a graphic novel out next time? That'd be great.
A graphic novel of the Song of Solomon, I think is
perfect.
It will make Abingdon's yearly budget.
It would.
Yes.
So,
again, we want to thank our listeners for listening. And so for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
I want you to subscribe and like this video. And push that thumbs up.
Thank you for listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share on all social media outlets. You can check out old episodes and more information at beardedtheologians.com. Thanks for checking us out.